We're back at it here at Decision Makers, our frequent conversations with policymakers, prognosticators, and the experts who offer us the latest insights and perspectives on a wide range of issues. Welcome back. And joining us now is Shannon Baker-Branstetter. She is Senior Director of Domestic Climate Policy and Energy, or Senior Director of Domestic Climate and Energy Policy. I want to make sure I get that correct, at the Center for American Progress. Go to americanprogress.org for more information on her and her colleagues. It's a Washington, D.C. based think tank. Shannon, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, excellent, excellent. So can you first explain the conditions that led to those wildfires, which are raging in the Los Angeles metro area? It wasn't until recent that we were starting to hear about. They finally got a little bit of rain, but still raging, a lot of devastation and destruction. But explain how all of that's related to climate change.
So climate change makes the air hotter and the climate drier, which means that there are just more, there's more tinder to burn. And as it heats up, it causes wildfires to be more frequent, more intense, and more deadly. And the other major problem with an environment that's changed by human-caused climate change is that there are fewer days per year the preventative burns can be done. So in California, for example, in Southern California, there are 30 fewer days where preventative burns can be done, which further means that controlled burns that could help create perimeters can't be done as many days out of the year. So both the prevention and the conditions are impacted.
What about this event made this so much more spectacular and devastating from previous wildfires in California? California now becoming much of a wildfire state, of being known for its wildfires, or being much more devastating and destructive from wildfires in other places. What made this different?
So wildfires have been getting much worse, burning more land and more structures over the last few decades. But this fire was particularly notable in just how many structures it impacted. Okay. Tens of thousands of structures were burned, and just the number of people who were impacted, because the LA area is denser than a lot of areas that are used to wildfires.
Yeah, and we should be expecting more of these types of droughts, these types of heat waves that will lead to more of these kinds of wildfires in the future. What really should we be bracing for? As we talk to people, we describe to people how destructive all of this is. How much should we be bracing for?
Yeah, globally, 5% more land is burned each year. And so that growth is just really troubling. We need more protection and preventative measures around structures, around homes and community infrastructure. And then, of course, we also need to take action to mitigate climate change that will thwart the worst of this, because it's not just wildfires, right? It's flooding, it's extreme heat, extreme storms. And so we need both the mitigation of the climate change fueled impacts, as well as preventative measures to help people adapt and have better resilience when these incidents do happen.
And on that note, or on that question about having people being able to respond more adequately, policymakers responding more adequately to climate change disasters. Before we get into a deeper discussion about like the current administration and also policymakers, not just on the federal level, but state and local, I wonder about how urgent do you feel the population, like, national population, global population, is still treating climate change as a major issue? And how are they also accepting that this isn't just some new weather cycle we're in? This is something that's fueled by constant use of oil and gas. And we can't overlook that. So are people really taking climate change seriously, especially when they see, that's the other thing too, when you see news reports about the LA wildfires, very little discussion on how much climate change contributed to that. Lots of discussions about, of course, about the wildfires themselves, but very little discussion. And so that kind of misleads the public into thinking that, oh, well, maybe this is not climate change that caused this. Maybe it's just something else.
Yeah, I do think that more and more people are aware of the risks and costs that human-driven and fossil fuel-driven climate change is causing. I think that more and more people are connecting the dots, but I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think it's easy for a lot of media to just cover the destruction and the death and the drama of the wildfires without getting to the root cause of what makes these wildfires more frequent. So I do think that better media coverage would help people connect the dots, but I do think in the US and globally, more and more people are realizing and feeling the costs of climate change
yeah,
disasters.
yeah. Sometimes like the, news media and, even local down to local news media, your local weather people or meteorologists, they're making it seem like it's just a major weather event that just led to that. And no, it's something bigger than that. So, um,
Exactly.
yeah. So, how worried should we be about, and are you, about how this new administration is responding to this disaster? You have a president, who's snubbing California for political reasons, conservative media circles who are looking for reasons to criticize the Los Angeles mayor and California governor, and the president also saying he'd like to eliminate FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, as well. That's the lead federal government agency when these types of disasters happen. They coordinate disaster response. So how bad is all of this?
Yeah, it's bad. And it is in a huge contrast to what we were seeing under the Biden administration, which not only was investing in clean energy and renewables and all kinds of climate change solutions, but also was providing resilience relief. The Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill provided $50 billion in resilience related funding. So to help coastal communities, to help communities that are vulnerable to wildfires and extreme heat. But then this administration, we're seeing a complete 180 from that. We're seeing climate change denial or dereliction of any kind of duty for the US to have proactive climate policy. We're seeing blocking of our cheapest forms of energy, which are clean wind and solar. And we're seeing playing politics with FEMA and doing this blame game based on politicians' political affiliation. And so all of that is just really disheartening and upsetting and just not what we need. We need both climate change solutions and we need to help people who are in need, regardless of who their representatives are or whether or how they voted.
So, already given an assessment of how response has been on the federal level, what could major cities like LA and surrounding areas, what could they have done to better prepare for this? What could states have done or could do, to kind of fill the void if you've been thinking about that or looking at that, how could they fill those gaps that the federal government, especially with this new administration, is refusing to do?
So the California legislature did act quickly to authorize millions of dollars for emergency response and helping with rebuilding, helping schools that have been burned down, students who have been affected. So the state is definitely putting its own money to support recovery efforts and prevention. But insurance rates, those are regulated by the state, but those are definitely going to be going up because the risk is increasing. And so I think the question that we all should be asking ourselves is who should pay for this additional damage, right? Should
Yeah.
it be taxpayers? Should it be individual homeowners? Or should it be the companies that have been profiting from making and producing fossil fuels, which are causing these extreme disasters? So I think that there has to be a contribution from the fossil fuel industry, because otherwise we are left with higher bills for households and for states and federal governments.
Yeah, has the fossil fuel industry given any indication that it would it would subsidize these types of responses to these types of disasters, or that
I
they
have
would take
not
some
seen
sort of
any
responsibility
voluntary,
for it?
I have not seen any voluntary commitments, but you do see states like Vermont and New York that are now setting up climate superfund programs that are going to require contributions from fossil fuel companies to pay for recovery, relief, and resilience in those states. So I think that there is a growing awareness that that is a possible solution. But no, I don't see fossil fuel companies volunteering at this point.
Not volunteering, but we have been seeing an increase in the number of lawsuits litigation against fossil fuel companies. Are we about to see more of them? How successful has that route been?
Yeah, there have been quite a few lawsuits. Some have been more successful than others. There's a Montana lawsuit that happened recently that did find fossil fuel companies accountable. But I'm not sure. I think it's hard to say. Might be a little early on the liability front, but I think the state initiatives to have a statutory response and make the liability part of the law is definitely a good development.
You know, in a case like this with these wildfires, Shannon, I think about, you know, the type of infrastructure that could be built to mitigate the impact of a wildfire like that. You know, in the future, now could a city like LA and other cities that are watching this unfold now think about how they build homes, how they build other types of like structures, you know, whether they be, you know, like businesses or places where populations congregate. You know, what sorts of solutions should we be looking at? You know, what sorts of climate mitigation structures and buildings or building should we be looking at or exploring at this point?
Yeah, I think there are lots of solutions out there in terms of materials, in
Okay.
terms of having a perimeter that is vegetation free around properties. We're seeing some of that happen in Paradise, California, as homes are being rebuilt. It is a more rural area, though, in Paradise, so the solutions are probably going to be different in LA. But there are physical solutions. And then there also are just preparedness steps that the local government can take in terms of communication, in terms of evacuations, in terms of healthcare coordination during emergencies. So I think, but again, you know, it does all take resources and funding.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that there is funding for those response and mitigation in the first place.
So Shannon, we've already established that there's warranted skepticism that the current administration and Congress are not going to respond to these types of disasters adequately. But if they intensify in red states as opposed to blue states like California, could that all tip the calculus?
I think so. I mean, we are seeing rebuilding efforts happening in North Carolina, which recently experienced those terrible floods. And then Louisiana, Texas, Florida, all are very subject to, you know, bad storms, hurricanes, et cetera. So it really is not a red or a blue state issue in terms of feeling these climate fuel disasters. So I do hope that there is more political pressure to treat all Americans the same in what they need when disaster strikes their area.
You know, one thing I've been having discussions with different experts on different folks in not just the public sector, also the private sector. There's some murmuring, some whispering about maybe this administration might be slightly more amenable to responding to climate if it's framed within something of a marketplace opportunity, something that's, you know, entrepreneurial or something that they can make money off of. And so I don't know, have you been hearing that same conversation that, okay, we don't believe in climate change, but if we can make a marketplace or some kind of profit motive off of this, something that's revenue generating, okay, we might listen to this a little bit more and invest in something that, or some kind of innovation or some kind of model that then contributes to climate change response or climate mitigation solutions. Have you been hearing the same thing? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the Department of Energy in particular, under the Biden administration, was doing a lot of research and commercialization
Yeah.
and support for new clean energy technologies and seeing that investment all around the country, which improves domestic manufacturing, domestic jobs, and helps lower the cost of energy. And so all of that was just really positive, and we're still seeing a lot of those benefits. I do think in the first week, seeing President Trump's executive orders, we're cutting off a lot of
Okay.
leasing for solar and for wind. That is definitely the wrong direction. As I mentioned, wind and solar are one of the cheapest forms of energy. So we really should be making sure that we are investing in those clean energy technologies and
Yeah.
deployment, but not seeing a whole lot of promise in the first week of this presidency in that direction, unfortunately.
All right. Thanks again, Shannon. Really appreciate your time here. I'm sure we'll be catching up with you at some later point. Keep track of what's been happening in this space. You've been so that wraps up this episode. I'm Charles Ellis, and I'm your executive producer and host of Warm Round of Gratitude to our partners, of course, and more information on us at thebnote.com while you're subscribing. Also want to give real quick shout out to our senior producer, Raven Robinson. And until the next episode, take care and be safe.